Welcome to Book and Lounge, a podcast where we discuss the latest and greatest books by Black writers. In this episode, we are talking about If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery, a splendid collection of interconnected short stories that takes us into the lives of a Jamaican family living in Florida. With a diverse range of characters, the book explores themes of identity, family bonds, migration, and resilience in the face of challenges. If you haven't read it yet, you're in for a treat with this humorous and moving debut that was shortlisted for this year's Booker Prize. I'm joined by Annette and Kate to discuss the book, so let's hear what they had to say. So first of all, thank you very much for joining. So we're discussing If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery, which is shortlisted for the Booker Prize. So I guess my first question is, do you think it deserves to be shortlisted for the Booker Prize?
Yes, I think it is. Although I confess I haven't read any of the other books, so I can't review this book in context. But I thought it was a really strong novel, or I think I read it as a novel, and then I've since heard it's a series of short stories and a novel. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's a really just strong piece of writing, one of the strongest I've read this year. I think it's got so many layers to it, and I know we'll go on and talk about some of the themes, but I just thought it was just quite good how he was able to weave in these very different issues around what it means to be an immigrant, what it means, to have, the generational difference, that relationship between father and son, those kind of male voices, and exploring the male experience, exploring the Black experience in America from a very particular viewpoint. So yeah, good luck to him.
Do you generally read Booker? That discernment.
I can't say I do. I would love to be able to sit here and say, yes, I am one of those enlightened people. It definitely makes me pay attention, because when I go into the bookshop around the time, there's always a display table. So I definitely have a look at the Booker Prizes, but it's not the thing that drives me to read something.
How about you, Annette?
I haven't read the others, so I can't, judge it in the context of the other ones. I didn't love the book, but I do believe that I think it deserves to be within. I'll need to read the other ones in the shortlist anyway. But I am listening to it again with kind of a bit more of an open mind and fresh ears, because I read it as a novel, not as a short story. I'm going through it and I'm still struggling to see it as short stories, but there is a lot within it and it is beautifully written, so I can appreciate that. But I think I've read maybe a few other books in that the Booker Prize shortlist long as before. I can't remember, but it's not. I feel like there's been similar books, not maybe to this much kind of layering, but there's been similar themes before. So yeah.
So I used to religiously read books that appear on the Booker list, and I stopped doing that a while ago now. But I do believe that. I think, as Kay said, it's a really strong book. And as I would also say that it's one of the best books I've read in the last 12 months. It's a collection of interlinked short stories tracing the life of this one family that's migrated from Jamaica. They're fleeing basically the violence in Jamaica in the 1980s. When all this violence blew up after the US infiltrated various organizations, supplied drugs and so on into Jamaica, and then there was just a whole lot of violence. So they escaped and they moved to Miami, and it basically charters their experience, and it's told from the perspective of various characters in the book, but the main one is Trelawny. Gosh, I can't pronounce his name.
Trelawny,
yes. So it's mainly, most of the stories are from his perspective, but we also hear from his father's perspective and also from his brother. And I think the main strength of the book for me is that it tells a migrant story and how the struggles that you go through as a migrant moving into a different country. And then also this issue of belonging and identity. And I think his is exacerbated by the fact that he's also very light-skinned. So really, he cannot be placed as to where he's from. And he's struggling with that identity because he can't really he's not accepted by various different communities, parts of the community. And so he's trying to figure out where he fits in the society within which he lives, but also when he goes to Jamaica. So it's a deep exploration of identity. And I mean, initially when I first started reading it, I was very apprehensive because I'm thinking, oh my goodness, here's another book on race. But I like his take on it. I like how he really goes deep into the exploration of that dual. Well, he's not even dual. I was just going to say dual nationality. He's not even dual because both his parents are Jamaican. It just so happens that they have a mixed heritage. And so he doesn't look like he's from Jamaica. So anyway, we'll come on to that. I think both of you mentioned that you read it as a novel rather than a short story. So do you think then that it works very well as a novel?
Yeah, I think so, because they were long, short stories. So in my head, I was like, okay, this is the next chapter. And because they all linked, it just didn't occur to me that they were short stories, because it was quite chronological. He'd gotten older, he'd done uni, trying to get a job. Yes, other stories might have been in between those parts, but they were all still linked. So for me, I think it works well as a novel. I'm listening to it again, and I'm going to try and understand it as a short story. But I felt like if you just opened it randomly in one chapter, you might not really you won't fully get what's going on if you hadn't had started from the beginning. Whereas I think with short stories, you should be able to do that. Just open it and read it, and not necessarily have to understand the whole context.
That's interesting. How about you, Kay?
Yeah, I agree with that. To me, it just felt episodic, like he was just jumping to moments, but I didn't, like Annette says, I didn't appreciate them as short stories. And I think I quite liked that structure, because it was almost if these are the key moments in which decisions were made, or I set myself on a course for good or for bad. I think we'll come to discover lots of times not very successfully, but I'm not sure it would have added value to the story for him to tell the bits in between that.
Mm-hmm.
It was just quite illuminating just to learn about, well, this is my experience as a light-skinned black man of Jamaican parents in the US. And then I go to here's another defining experience when I go to university, and here's another defining experience when I come home. So I felt it worked. It flowed as a novel, and totally agree with what Annette says. You couldn't have jumped in halfway through. There are just parts of the relationship you wouldn't have appreciated unless you had read it from the beginning.
That's interesting, because I read it as a collection of short stories, and it was only I think I was about halfway through that I dawned on me that hold on, these are all connected. So I felt that I actually enjoyed them and understood what was going on without the backstory and without necessarily connecting them to what happened before. So and especially when I read after reading the first one, and then I read the story on top, I think it's Under the Aki Tree. I didn't at all link them until the end of the story. So it's interesting. It's interesting that you say that. And I was listening to someone else was discussing this, and she was saying that she wished, unlike what you think, she wished she'd actually just selected one character and then focused on that one character and then told the story from their perspective.
That's an interesting take, but I felt the stories were richer for having spoken to different, not spoken to, but having the story told from the perspective of different characters.
Mm-hmm.
To me, one of the most, I think there's a strong theme throughout about fathers and sons.
Yeah.
And, the absence, are they present? Are they supportive? Are they not? But for me, one of the most powerful elements of the story, the one that resonated with me, is the fact that you follow this young boy, Trelawny, and this is his experience, and this is how he sees the world. And then you read his father's take.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's that classic case of, well, through Trelawny's eyes, you think his dad is probably not a very nice person. And then you read his father's take, and it's like, well, okay, these were the pressures he was facing. This is what the world looked like from where he was sitting. And I think when we discussed this before, I said I would love, if somehow in this world, Trelawny had understood where his father was coming from and his father had understood. But they probably will never have that conversation.
No.
And I think that's true for real life. It's you kind of exist in these worlds and you never talk, you never properly communicate. But I just thought it was very powerful to read those stories side by side. I understood a bit more about each of them and I had a bit more empathy for each of them. And I think that, again, that feeds into this whole, the immigrant experience and the generational experience as well, what it's like to be a migrant to a new country, what it's like to be first generation, the children of immigrants, trying to balance that sense of these are where my parents are from, but actually this is what I know.
Mm-hmm. So you've kind of mentioned the relationship between Trelawny and his dad, but there are more conflicts in the book. So what do you think are some of the major conflicts and how do they drive the narrative forward? So there's that between the dad and the son and how they never really understand each other. And then there's this sibling rivalry between him and his brother because he believes or he feels that his brother's always been the favored one.
Yeah, maybe there's something about this lack of communication, this lack of understanding, and trying to get to the root of that. I think they both feel displaced in some way. That's the sense I got from the story. You've got this man who comes from Jamaica and he tries to make his way in the US, and maybe it's not going in the way that he'd wanted. And then here you have this kind of American-born son who has a different perspective and doesn't feel like he fits and feels like he's constantly trying to, change himself and trying to find his place. And I think there's something about the similarities of their experiences, or they go through the same things but in different ways, but they never talk.
No.
They never have that conversation.
Topper, grown up in Jamaica, has grown up with a certain culture. And Trelawny has grown up in the US where I guess you just sit down and talk more about these things. Whereas Topper has grown up in a completely different environment. You don't question your identity, you just fit in. Whereas Trelawny, he's in this place where he doesn't belong. So I feel that, and also he is now educated and has gone above the level of his parents. And I got the feeling that not that he thought that he was better than them, but he because he's more educated and also he's first generation America, he just didn't feel that he didn't fit in with his family. Delano, on the other hand, just accepts who he is. And I think that's part of what drives the conflict between him, his brother, and his dad. The other two, they understand each other. Whereas because he's born in America, he's sworn allegiance to the flag. I feel that I get the feeling that he feels he's a bit different from them. And I think that came through in where he's left university now. He's gone back home and he's searching for work. And I think his dad tells him to either go and work with his brother. And then he's like, I've gone to university now. I don't need to do that. I'm sitting in front of my computer applying for jobs because this is how things are done nowadays.
I think as a small part, I do think he did feel like he was better than them. Just a little bit. I think just a little bit, especially with, for example, when his dad said, go and work with your brother. I think he gives me, I get the impression he was someone who, if he had to go and stack shelves in a supermarket for a bit whilst he looks for a job, he still wouldn't do it because he's got a degree. I do think there's an element of, yes, he doesn't fit in, but I think he saw himself as better than them, for sure. And that, I don't know, I think that just plays a little bit of a part into how he viewed them. I don't know, sometimes he saw them, he was a little bit patronizing in some ways, but yeah, I do think he thought he was better than them. I do. Especially also, for example, when he was younger and feeling really embarrassed by, how his parents spoke. That's a common thing, I get it. But, I don't know, it just felt like he never kind of just stood up for them or said, well, I can't explain it. I just felt like there was a bit of entitlement there.
And how about the conflict between him and his brother then? How does that come about?
So this is between Trelawny and Delano.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you said that Delano, so he's born in Jamaica, isn't he?
Yes.
And he seems much more adept at straddling both cultures. he knows how to be American and he knows how to be Jamaican.
Mhm.
And I thought that was a really interesting way to explore that, that children of immigrant experience. You do, like, it's code switching in a way, right? You learn how to survive in both worlds. And I think the thing that Delano is able to do that Trelawny isn't is code switch. He knows how to be comfortable, or he's accepted his place. And he also buys into there's a certain order to things. And I think that comes to a head when they're talking about who owns the house. Well, I'm the firstborn son, and I was told this is going to be my house. And you kind of get the sense that Trelawny doesn't want that house. He just wants to one up his brother. Again, my mind through this whole book is that Trelawny is this really awkward, quick kid who's never really never really found his place.
Mhm.
And even all the travails that Delano goes through, you get a stronger sense of, I know who I am, I know where I belong, I know what I can do. And you kind of, Trelawny just goes up and down, and you see that in the choices he makes and the places he ends up working, and, the poor situations he finds himself in. And the irony being is, aren't you the most educated? Aren't you the one that's gone to college? Aren't you the one with a big man education who's come back? And it's you the one that feels dispossessed compared to these poor, lowly manual workers. So, yeah, I thought that was an interesting take on it as well. And probably far more realistic. They're definitely the bits of the story that resonated with me is this idea, you go to school, get your education, go off, and you'll do fine, you'll do much better. That's going to work for you. And I felt like the author was saying with Trelawny's story, well, actually not always.
Yeah.
It's never, the journey's never as clear cut as that. There are other things that can undermine you. And again, I just thought one of the reasons I really liked this book is I do think he's making a point about immigrants and if I survived you, and this kind of desperation of his existence, and all the things he goes through. But he doesn't kind of beat you over the head with those issues. It's all it feels like life. He does it in a very engaging way, I think, and he explores so many issues through Trelawny.
Yeah, and I felt it was more exploratory, the migrant experience, because it's talked about it from different perspectives, and also showing the lives of different types of migrants. So you have the Cubans and the Russians who are living in the apartment block, and then you have Jelly and her family, his Cuban girlfriend, and then you have the white migrants. I mean, he does just mentions them in passing, but you also see how living in America is from their perspective. Short as it is, you still see that. So I think he's just really exploring the various types of migrants and then their experiences and how they feel they fit in. And I think as a book on that, I think it's really well done. Now, we mentioned earlier on the places that he ends up working in. For me, that's what I found the book very really humorous. But I think the situations that Trelawny found himself in are the things that brought the humor out in the book. So he finds himself just working in really, really odd jobs. And his source of basically work, or how he finds his job, is basically going through adverts in Craigslist. I think my favorite is where, I can't remember the name of the story. The story now is about the one with the woman who wants to be punched because she wants to know what it's like to be punched in the face. It's just like hilarious. And then this couple, the last story, this couple who just are looking up, they just want someone to watch. I mean, how did the author come up with some of these ideas? So I found this really, really funny. I just wanted to know whether or not you found humor in the stories, and what you found humorous.
I found it funny. I think there was a point sometimes I was like, why am I listening to this? I mean, it's fine, but it was like, because I was saying some of the chapters are quite long. So, yeah, I think without them, it might not have been as humorous. But also, I just thought this must be, I didn't doubt it. I feel like maybe even the author might have even gone on Craigslist and had a look to see what was out there and what people were
Yeah.
asking for. I'm sure that this is all very true. This is what people do. I didn't really see them as jobs because then he was still unemployed for a few hours, I suppose. So yeah. But yeah, I think those are the things that definitely brought humor into the book. And yeah, it just made it very believable. I don't know. I think sometimes because I said I felt like he did come across as a bit entitled. He would sit there, but like, oh no, I'm not going to do this. Like this is just not something I would do. And he makes it sound like he has very strong morals, and then he'll just end up doing it. And
Yeah.
so yeah, but I think I had a few issues with just his character in general, so and how he was.
I think when we discussed this in the book club, I think someone mentioned that he's possibly on the spectrum.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. I didn't know. I didn't get that myself, but I wouldn't. I'll be honest. I wouldn't know to spot that, if that makes sense. I wouldn't. It's not something I would look out for myself. But I'd be honest with you, they were funny, but these were moments in the book that tested me a little. I was like, "What? What's going? What?
Yeah,
okay, all right. Is he going to do this? All right." And maybe the bigger, I was trying to, like, what is he trying to say here? Like, what's going on? Is this, is this about desperation? Is this just about the things you'll do? Is it a comment about how crazy Craigslist was back in the day, or still is, if it's still going? I don't know. There were moments where I was like, oh, okay.
It's the bizarre situations in which he put the characters that I found really, really funny, and I found really made the stories humorous, despite the really serious issues that he was actually exploring. Kala is explored deeply, especially in the first story, where he's constantly asked, "Where are you from?" And he cannot answer that question. And then he asks his mum, where are we from? And his mum cannot answer the question because of their heritage. So she's got Jewish, Scottish, a mixture of all different types of backgrounds. And so she can't really answer that question. And then essentially does he ask, "Are we black?"
I think he does at one point, and then he's told, "That's a stupid question."
Yes.
I think, and
not remembering that, but
say you're a bit of everything. I think that's what she said. Like, just say you're a bit of this, bit of that.
But the issue is, if you say you're a bit of everything, nobody ever really accepts that, right? And so this is why he's struggling. In school, some people see him as black, and then some people see him as Spanish because of his color, because he's very fair skinned. So they assume he's Dominican, but then he doesn't speak Spanish, so they kick him out of the group. And so skin color plays a big theme in the book. You have the scenario where you have these, I think it was an Argentinian, a Jewish person, and I can't remember where the third person was from. They're trying to basically have each other's whiteness. So to be white, basically, for them is the thing to aim for. And so they struggle to understand how other people can't see them as being white. And then you have Jelly's family, who, when he goes to visit, to have dinner with them, basically the mother's just constantly referring to everything. Every time she mentions something that's black, she points at him, although he's actually quite light.
And I think he did that really well. I think there are so many facets to the issue, and I think he explored that really well throughout the book.
Mm-hmm.
I have to admit, I felt a little bit like you when I started to read this about, oh my God, another race, African-American story, which, don't get me wrong, I've read many of those stories over many years, and I wanted a different take, and I think this book brought a different take. I think what he does really well in that first chapter is he kind of presents it through the eyes of a child.
Yeah.
Because it's told in a second person, but he kind of goes through the experience. I think when we talk about this, my reflection is it's just relentless. The question, that first chapter just feels relentless reading it, but what he gets across, I think, is, well, it is relentless. If this is what you're constantly asked each day, how do you begin to find yourself against that barrage of questioning and criticism and trying, you're young and you're trying to fit in anyway. But I don't know, at the end, it almost comes across as an obsession. And I found it interesting that it comes from all sides. I think if this had maybe been the kind of the stereotypical narrative I'm thinking about, particularly American, it would have been white versus black and them questioning where you are. But I think what you see through this book, he gets it from everyone. He gets it from Hispanic people, the Cubans. He gets it from other black people. The bit I found darkly humorous is when he's I think he's at college, and he goes to a bar, and they keep saying, "You look like someone who could work here."
Yeah.
And essentially what they're saying is, who do you think you are? You're black. We don't serve black people. Black people work here and serve everyone else. And he's that kind of sense of, it's actually another black person who's trying to bring you down a peg or two to let you know this is your place because of the colour of your skin and just how different it is. Yeah, I'm not sure what the conclusions were. I didn't at the end of the story come to anything, well, what we all need to do is come together, and just thought it's just relentless, it's nonsense. Like I want no part of this discussion. What I did find interesting as well, you spoke about those women.
Yeah.
I wondered if those women in their countries would be white.
Well, they are.
This idea of, I think we touched on this before, this kind of one drop rule in America. It's very American. One drop of black, and you are black. And I think in my lifetime, I've met people who are extremely fair skinned and who I've probably seen and thought, oh, they're white. And nope, I'm black. And like, oh, okay, well.
Meghan Markle.
Yeah, okay. Oh, she the one that discovered she was black when she got married to the royal family. Okay. But, it's... let's not go there. But, yeah, yeah, and his parents kind of dismiss this conversation. Don't get into it, but it almost feels as very much a part of the American experience of race. And again, that to me felt very unique because I'm not sure you'd have that level of conversation and interrogation in other countries. Like I feel like here in the UK, we're much more comfortable talking about somebody who's biracial or somebody who's mixed race. And in America, those terms can be not taken very nicely. Well, no, they're black. Okay. But yeah, I think he touches on that and what it means in terms of how he's accepted in certain social spaces and what it means for his own sense of belonging really well.
So I'm guessing in the UK, someone like Meghan Markle, let's forget that she's grown up in the US and all of that. If she was someone that had been born here, been brought up here and everything, would have been seen as a white woman anyway, rather than black woman. Is that what we're saying?
I don't know. I think people would have seen her as a mixed race woman.
Yeah.
I think I don't think those relationships are uncommon in the UK, and that's my sense anyway. I don't know. I just felt there were some conversations I didn't quite understand, and that's fine because not everything's for me to understand. I definitely felt like what this book was presenting was a very unique discussion about race that is very particular to that experience of being in a multicultural place like Florida, Miami, and having lots of people from lots of different communities, and colour being one way they try and place themselves and each other and relate to one another.
Let's say the book was set in New York. Would the characters' experiences and perspectives have been different?
I was just going to say, I watch Housewives of Potomac, and that's the only franchise I watch. And there are two women, but one in particular who is very, 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 very fair, very, very light skinned, grey, green eyes, and she's dyed her hair blondish. She would pass definitely as a white woman. And for like the first 2.5 seasons, relentlessly, there was a couple of women amongst the housewives that just kept questioning her, like, why do you keep calling yourself black? Like, you're not. Or not saying you're not, but why do you keep just fully identifying yourself as black? There is European in you. And she was like, no, I can trace Anyway, by the third season, she did a DNA test and she was like 60% European. And then she was like, well, that's not my fault. It was down to the, masters raping and slaves. But I because it was over 60%, I don't think it could have gone that far back. I actually think it was more recent than that. But that's kind of the excuse that she used. And she just shut it down because I don't care if it's 60% white, I'm black. and that was it. But it was just so interesting that for the first, because in my head I was like, she's black, like just leave. Like again, I've seen her parents; they were very light skinned as well. But if that's, I get it. If that's how she wants to identify it, then that's fine. But it was just so interesting how relentlessly a couple of these women are just on her back saying, "No, you're too light. Like, how can you not?" I don't know. It was so strange that she had to go and do a DNA test. But then obviously it became public. So then she just put it on her Instagram to kind of show people like the breakdown. But I guess she wasn't even expecting the amount of European like DNA in her. Yeah.
So the women that were interrogating her, were they themselves white or black?
Everyone's black in Potomac.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting.
There's one who's also quite light, but she's slightly darker, so you would know that Giselle is darker, but Robin is very light. And her mum as well. Her mum she sounds as I could the resemblance, it just sounded very familiar. When Trelawny was saying his mum has like bone straight hair, Robin's mum also has bone straight hair. You wouldn't think at all. Yeah.
Although the ladies in Jamaica then kind of said actually she has straight hair because she perms her hair.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I forgot. Whereas I think with this person's Robin's mother, I could just see it grows straight. So yeah.
These like conversations around colorism and light and dark, I'm not sure how I feel about them anymore. I feel like I had a lot of these conversations when I was younger in response to popular culture and who was seen as desirable and what did it mean to be good looking and who did you see in magazines and those sorts of things. And I was trying to think like, well, what was that experience like? What lesson did I learn? What did I take away from it? And I'm not sure I did. I just found these conversations just after a while quite jarring, and I just couldn't be bothered to have them anymore because they just seemed to be a wedge issue. Like I knew what arguments people were going to make before they made those arguments. It's interesting because I've never watched that Housewives, but I almost feel like I have in terms of having heard those sorts of discussions in other spaces. Like I'm quite sure I know exactly what they would have said before they said it, even though I've never watched it. So I for me, the success of this book and this author is he talks about it, and he talks about it in all its complexity. And it's just that's kind of what it was. And he goes on and he lives his life, but I do wonder what is to be gained by constantly going over these issues. Not we should never talk about them, but I never feel like so what?
Yeah, but if we
I never feel like
if we do not talk about these issues and raise them, and then are we, number one, denying our experiences, and then number two, by someone like this writing about them and actually his book being listed for the Booker Prize, does it not then bring it to a much wider audience who may not necessarily know the kind of experiences that we have? I think that we should talk about these things.
But do you not think we do? Look, I think as a Black woman growing up in the UK who came of age in the 2000s, like colorism was definitely something I experienced, and conversations I had with my friends and things that were said to me negatively about my skin tone and things I noticed when I was, I used to love watching MTV Base and all the hip hop videos. And, after a while, there's a certain pattern to the girls that keep featuring in these videos. I can't deny those discussions and those issues were a part of my experience, but I kind of look back and I don't. So what came of it? And I kind of get that feeling a little bit in this story as he talks about them, but there is no real, he doesn't conclude one way or another. I don't feel.
But do you not
maybe
think
others
that
did.
other people reading this, for example, would have more, I guess, empathy for someone who's maybe going through a situation like this, or have at least a better understanding of where people are coming from when they're mixed heritage and they don't really know where they stand within society? Do you not think that having something like this and then having these conversations kind of helps us to understand people better?
Maybe I take that point. That's a fair point. I suppose that bit just doesn't resonate with me, but I understand if you don't know, if you don't know and you're learning about this for the first time, it's a good kind of exploration of just how entwined it is with this young kid's experience, being constantly asked where he's from and not, fit in here, but you don't fit here, and those misunderstandings about his identity and the impact it has on him.
I think there are quite a lot of us that are lost. I would say that I know where I come from and where I belong, but even me, that I do have bouts where I'm like, where exactly actually do I belong? Because when I'm here, I don't exactly feel at home. But when I go to Uganda, sometimes I don't feel at home either, because I've lived outside Uganda for much longer now. That some of the things that people do there and feel at home doing, for me, is just very alien. So I think that having a book like this where you explore these things may not necessarily answer all the questions, but at least you kind of know that you're not the only one, and you kind of think, oh, it's okay, it's okay to be asking these questions. It's okay to be feeling this way. At least that's what I took from that.
I agree with that. Away from the issue of, well, I suppose you can't separate the issues. That's the point. Like, colorism is wrapped up in that. But that, what you talked about, and so where is home for me, I definitely remember going, to the Caribbean and thinking, oh, well, I'm going to feel super comfortable here. And very quickly, people letting me know, you ain't Caribbean, you're an English girl, in whatever way, whether it was the food I was eating or liked and didn't like, or it was the way I was dressed, or whatever, the way I carried myself. So yeah, I do think you have that. Even as second generation, like my grandparents migrated and my parents were born here, I still have those questions. So, and actually, now you've said that, those bits of the story resonated with me more, I think, than the conversations about colour. So the bit where he returns to Jamaica, and I think he then comes back and says, to his father, like, why did you leave? We would have been happier. And I think his father's like, well, you don't actually understand what it was like and why we left. And this sense of, well, isn't the grass greener on that side? And this connection with culture and wanting to feel comfortable and wanting to belong. And yeah, I think those are interesting discussions to have. And I do think there are generations still having that conversation, perhaps not in as full as way as we could do.
Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I really liked about the book is the narrative structure. So it's told from different perspectives and also different narrative voices. So you have stories that are written in first person, and then you have some in second person, but also you have some that are told in patois. So I found that it gave a good variety, and also just made the book much more interesting to read. So especially the ones that were in second person, I found that they put me into the middle of the action. So I enjoyed the variety. And so why do you think that the author chose to write in different narrative voices? And what impact did that have on your enjoyment of the collection?
No, I didn't think of that now, because I was listening to it. So I was just going with the flow. I think maybe if I was reading it, I'd be a bit more cognizant of, it's kind of changed. I don't know if that maybe has something to do with their personalities. I don't know if I'm thinking too much into it, but Trelawny, for example, his was in first person quite a bit. He just gives off very much main character type. I don't know, he's in his head a lot. It just makes sense. So I'm not sure if maybe it has something to do with just what that person might be like. And then also, it could be how he wanted to tell that particular story. I'm trying to remember now whose might have been in a different... Was his dad's in first person?
His dad. The second story, Under the Aki Tree, that was in... it was still in second perspective narrative, but that one had a lot more patois.
Oh, yeah.
In it. And I like that, because for me, that kind of brought out his character. You kind of saw it from his perspective, because that's how he would speak.
I liked the variety. I like the variety of narrative styles, and I think it was quite bold actually to have the first chapter told in the second person, because he does then go on to settle into the usual first person, but there was something about that narrative that quite grabbed me immediately, because it wasn't what I was expecting.
Which one did you enjoy reading the most, and why?
I think, well, the most dramatic one definitely was Cookies, right? Because of the way it ended. God, I felt a sense of foreboding from like the first couple of pages of his story. There was something that felt fresh about this story because of the male voices that he brought together. But there's something about the poor decision making, and that's made, and lots of moments where I'm just like, why did you do that? What made you do that? And you kind of get it through in Cookie's story. That definitely comes through, but not in the same way. I just felt sorry for him. It always felt like it was coming from a good place rather than a stupid place, the decisions he was making. And I knew he was doomed when he left his wife and newborn. I think he then goes on to do things, and I don't know, can we have spoilers here? And he attempts to blackmail the wrong person. And you kind of sense it's all going down. But for me, the feeling of, don't leave your wife and kid, like not now. Now is not the time to leave them. And I kind of got a sense of immediately at that point. I thought, okay, this is going to go well.
I was like, you can't outsmart this man. I was like, you just can't. I don't. Yeah. Stop.
So I've read these stories now, I think maybe 3 times, and every time I read them, I come back with a different perspective. So when I read Cookie's story the first time, I didn't predict any of that, and also it didn't have as much impact on me as it did when I read it the second time. So it's really interesting how every time I've read it, I've come out with some new experience from it.
And what was the last time you read it? What was your takeaway?
It's really sad, really touching. Whereas when I read it the first time, I was like, okay, it's just another short story. But then having read it the second time, I was like, that's really poignant. Yeah. And even the Odd Jobs. When I read Odd Jobs the first time, I remember laughing so much. And when I read it the second time, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what desperation makes a person do.
I didn't feel sorry for Trelawny in the same way I felt sorry for Cookie.
No?
I don't know no, I really didn't.
You feel that he was the author of his own misfortune?
I didn't feel much. Yeah, same. I was just like, you're thinking, you're reading, because you knew every time he was about to do something, you knew he was doing something wrong. But I can't help you. If you've already gone through the steps in your head, explaining why this isn't a good decision, and you still decide to do it, I can't empathize. I can't, because you're a smart guy. You know what you're doing is stupid. You're still going to do it. What can I do?
But he's desperate, right? He's homeless. He needs food. He's living in his car.
And your father offered you that job working on the construction. I just feel like, I don't know. I just feel like I get it, but sometimes I just like he got himself into certain situations and he really didn't have to. Maybe he's too stubborn. I don't know what it is, but just grow up.
Yeah.
Really grow up. Life is not easy, We all have to do things. Not that, but we all have to do things we don't like until we can get where we want to. This is not it.
I felt the stubbornness as well with Trelawny. Even back to the decision where, he was told, like, there's nothing here, don't come back. Like, obviously come and visit us, but, you might, if you're thinking you've got this degree, you might think further afield, and he decides he's not going to. Okay, he feels like he wants to come home, but I get the sense he still has some kind of structure around him, and for whatever reason, he doesn't, we've all had times in our life where we had to swallow our pride and humble ourselves, and I never get. And it goes back to what we said before. Like, does he feel like he's a little bit better because he's gone out and he's got the certificate? Whereas for Cookie, he doesn't have that. He doesn't have that guidance. He is, the guy who grows up without a father. And to me, the poignant bit in his story is that he goes and spends a summer with his father, and it's quite a productive summer. He bulks up. He gets something from it.
Yeah.
And then he goes again, and I think his father says something kind of derogatory to him, and then he walks away. He realizes whatever's gone before, actually, that those were his true feelings. And the mistake he makes is to go back.
Yeah.
If someone shows you who they are, believe them. But he's got nothing. He's got no one. He's desperate. And then, his mum at that point is no longer with him. So he's lost that. His true support network. So his act, as disappointing as decision making is, it really does feel like desperation. I don't always feel that with Trelawny.
How about the
I
man
feel like
and his
he feels hurt to me. I think I have more sympathy for him because doesn't he lose his family? And that really plays on his mind.
Some of the experiences that they go through, well, actually not just some, the majority of what they go through is beyond their control. We're set in the time of the financial crisis. They've got hurricanes. And then on top of that, you have your race issues playing a part. And so they make these decisions based on how desperate they are. And yes, I do agree. Trelawny's always made really silly decisions. And he knows he's making silly decisions and he knows the consequences, but he's so desperate. Well, at least this is how I feel. I feel that he was so desperate that despite knowing that this thing may not work out and may not be the correct course of action, he still makes those decisions and does those things that he's not supposed to do because he's so desperate.
But is the email that he shouldn't have sent out to all the newspapers because of his hair? Was that where was the? I don't know what the desperation was there. That
I can't excuse that one.
Where you kind of want to be. You're in the academia sphere and
mess up your whole career basically. Because who's going to employ you after you send that email?
No, I was just going to add that with the poor decisions, I think probably because we interact more with Trelawny. Maybe we've got more to go on to judge him rightly or wrongly. I feel like we have a sense of how everybody else has been backed into a corner. And I think with Trelawny, we just learned so much more. And some of those corners he's put himself in, even with his choice of partner as well. If I was being really generous, I would say, well, he's felt so lost, so much an outsider, love from somebody is enough. I don't know. I'm just trying to imagine like going out with somebody and their family just disrespecting me in that way and then still going back to their house and still having this kind of negotiation. That would just be a non, at the very least, I would say I'm just not going to that I'm not going to your family's house again. He kind of seems to like a glutton for punishment, like he goes back. I think by the end it was a little bit, come on, just like a little bit exhausted actually.
But that glutton for punishment thing also comes up in the final story where they've humiliated him by the swimming pool, and then he still goes back.
And more than any of the others, you feel like he has options. Like his father has clearly backed himself into a corner financially and feels very strongly about, why he's in the US. I thought it was interesting that his mother decides to go back. This sense of, look, I'm done here. Time to try my hand elsewhere. So.
But then when she goes back to Jamaica, she doesn't stay very long because she doesn't feel that she fits in there anymore either. And then she moves to Europe.
But do you know what? She does something different. I think that's almost that sense of, this is where I am, this is how I'm feeling, something has to change. So it's quite a bold decision to say, well, I'm going to leave. And I suppose there's this kind of like bigger question of, do things happen to you or do you happen to things? And it's not his fault. He's had all these bad things happen to him. This is why he is where he is. But maybe I'm projecting here my own personal beliefs. And I do think things can happen to you, but I've got to give it a go. If I fall flat on my face, I've got to feel like I've got some control. I've got to feel like I can make some decisions and I can try and grapple with a situation and try and turn things around for myself. And I never really truly feel like he does that. Well, maybe he becomes a teacher. I'm contradicting myself now. So that's a big leap. He goes and picks up this profession. But again, he somehow finds himself in a poor situation once again.
Okay, he finds himself in a bit of a pickle because of his hair. And yet how he responded to it is not necessarily how a normal, I guess you'd say, but then he's been told about his hair. His hair has grown too long. He should cut his hair. But why should you have to cut your hair? That's how your hair grows.
He doesn't have to cut his hair. There are structured ways to go about this to sort this out, not to go to the New York Times. It's very unfortunate that you've been told to cut your hair, but that's discriminatory. There are ways, get a solicitor. I don't know what you need to do, talk to the board, whatever it may be. But I don't know why you have to pick the most. That would be the last resort if I have to do, after I've exhausted all options, then I would do that.
Do you not think that it's like a combination of things? He's been thrown out of his home. He doesn't have anywhere to live. He's got this teacher thing. going on. He's got this whole Meghan and Tim thing going on, right? Do you know, I think that because it's a combination of all sorts of things happening at the same time.
No, because you didn't have to do the Meghan and Tim thing. Your mother told you not to buy the house. You still want to buy the house. Therefore, you're going to try and find to supplement your income by going on Craigslist. Why can't you just go get a part-time job in a supermarket? That would, like, everything that happened to him, 90% of it was by choice. 90%.
As you said that, I'm thinking the hurricane is basically his life, right? He lives in a constant whirlwind of stuff going on. And the thing is, like, yeah, no, I was going to try and defend him in some way, but no, I just
you just can't.
No, you can't. The hurricane was a natural disaster. That was the only thing that cannot be his. Like, that's not his. He's not to blame. Everything else, I feel like he's made those decisions. Yeah, you're with a girlfriend who doesn't even like kind of stand up to her parents. So in theory, she's probably also just as right. Like, you're just, I don't know.
Right. Okay, sorry. There's nothing I can do to defend him because, I mean, all of those things are true. So finally then, what emotions did the book evoke in you as you were reading it? How were you feeling?
Lots of different emotions, and that's a good question, because maybe that's the mark of a really good book, that it can swing you one way to the other. You know, I started the first one and I felt a bit sorry for him, and I felt even more empathy when he's going through his travails and he's paying someone to slap him, but at the end I'm just really annoyed with him. I'm not sure I like his dad. And then I read his dad's story, I read Tapper, and I think, okay, all right, you're of your generation. I understand where you're coming from. It's exhausting, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I felt by the end it's exhausting, but it felt more realistic than other books around migration. And, we had it tough, but then we got a job and it all came together and it's wonderful. Mm-hmm. This felt more realistic. It is desperate, and I'm still, If I Survive You, I think it's such a clever title, because as you're going through it, you're like, what are they surviving? Oh, his decision making, his life, the people around him, his family, everything. Oh yeah, the hurricane. So a mixture of emotions, but by the end I felt exhausted. I felt sad for him. I felt angry at him.
Mm-hmm.
But I leave thinking that's a really good way to make me feel as a reader.
And Annette?
Yeah, similar, quite frustrated at times, but it was very real. Though he seems to be quite a self-destructive person, I would say, a little bit. And there are people out there like that. And I don't know, I think maybe sometimes I thought of Cookie, and if he had some of the opportunities overall that Trelawny had, I don't know, maybe he might have made better use of them. I don't know. But yeah, frustrated. Amusing at times, but yeah, at the end of it, completely exhausted. And also just kept thinking how the only person that seems to try to break free from it was his mum, actually, and just kind of gone on and done her own thing and tried to explore. I remember at the beginning of the book when I think she was telling Trelawny what she does and where her company works and stuff, and we work here. He's like, have you ever done that? She goes, oh, maybe one day. And actually she went and she did it and she pushed herself. So yeah. Not saying everything might be perfect for her, but at least she's just trying something a bit different, and they all just seem very stuck.
Yeah. I sort of think that it kind of took me on a roller coaster. And the first story, I wasn't very happy with the dad. I was judging him. And then when I read his story, I had a better understanding of where he was coming from, and then the things that made him take the decisions that he made. And then I also had similar feelings towards Delano, thinking, why is he so horrible to his brother? But then I also read his story from his perspective, and then I kind of understood where he was coming from. Although I still can't excuse him for kicking his brother out, but that's a different thing. But so I kind of felt like I was on a roller coaster all the time. The bits that were really funny had me laughing out loud, but then there are bits that are really touching and sad. And I think what I took away from it the most is the fact that this life that we live, especially as migrants living in countries that are not necessarily ours, it's not an easy life. And the fact that we can still somehow go through all those experiences and still make it is testament to how strong we are as people. For me, that was the main takeaway. Gosh, he went through a lot, and I mean, the whole family have been through a lot, and it just shows that need to do so many things to survive, to be resilient. And I think that came across really well in the writing and in how Escoffery told the stories. And also, Annette, if you read the book itself rather than listening, I'd be interested to know whether or not your understanding and also how you feel about the stories is the same, or if they completely differ.
Yeah, I'm gonna purchase it. So I'm listening to it again now, and I'm still feeling the same. So I just think I need to purchase it and read it through properly. There's one other thing though. I feel like I'm not sure if I misunderstood. Did his dad want to become a fashion designer? Was that
He did?
He did. Okay, right. Yeah.
That's a good point, actually. That was a nice detail, which it quickly kind of gets moved over, and you're sad for him because you really felt like he had no choice. But then you think about Trelawny and you think, well, not that he wanted to be a fashion designer, but he had a bit more choice or a bit more freedom, and definitely made me a bit more empathetic to the father.
I think the difference between the two of them as well is Trelawny didn't really have a clue what he wanted from life, because he kept jumping from thing to thing, whereas his father had this set idea of what he wanted to do. And then he was told, okay, well, you can't do that. And then he moved on to the next thing that brought in an income and stuck with it. So to summarize then, what score would you give it out of 5, and would you recommend it?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend this. I think I gave it a 4 out of 5. I think I'm still there, 3.5, 4. No, I think it's a 4. I think there were moments where I was, okay, I'll roll with this, but it doesn't sit perfectly well with me. But just as a kind of a strong piece of writing, and the way he's able to kind of weave together all these complex issues in such a impactful way. Back to your first point about bringing a different take on a well-worn issue, enough to make me kind of want to read and to really get under the skin of what he's saying. I don't think they were all kind of 5 out of 5 stories. Some definitely work better than others, but as a pretty accomplished piece of writing for a debut, an amazing talent. Yeah, I enjoyed reading it.
You recommend it?
I would recommend it. I'd recommend it to different people for different reasons. I want my mum to read it, because I'd be very interested her take on that kind of first generation. Not sure you understand, but do understand your parents. She lived that experience. I'd recommend it to friends for kind of explorations around race. So yeah, for different reasons. I thought he touches on many issues. So yes.
Cool. Annette?
I'll give it a 3.5 out of 5. I think for me, it requires a few reads. I don't know, that's just my personal opinion, but I'm going to have to read it again. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but also I'm going to have to read something a few times. I'm not sure. So yeah, but for like a debut novel, I think it's written beautifully. And also, yes, a lot of the topics and themes within it have been obviously discussed before, but it's been done in a very different way, and I quite like that. And as frustrating as the characters were, you really did get a sense of who they were, and I could just visualize a lot of different things and what was happening, and so I appreciated that. But also, like Kay said, some of this now I see them as short stories. Not all of them really needed to be there or be as long. And for example, I think I was said in book club, even though I like Cookie's story, I didn't get, and he was mentioned a bit before when growing up with them, it just came out of nowhere. Yeah, I think some of the short stories within there were not as strong, and so could have been a few chops and edits there. But no, it was good, and I would recommend it. Just it's going to take a few more reads for me to maybe appreciate it more. I'm not sure.
I would give it a 4 out of 5 as well. I really enjoyed reading this. I think it's very well written. I like the fact that he's used different narrative voices. I like the fact that although he's exploring issues that we've read in lots of different other books, he's brought a different perspective to it. And I actually do like the randomness of the characters, and I like that randomness. I think for me, it wouldn't have worked had it been just a novel. I like it the way it is. And I can understand why he's made it onto the Booker shortlist. I'd recommend it to everybody. It's just a really good book. That's where I am. But yeah, so thank you very much for the conversation, and speak to you guys again soon.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this or any of our other episodes, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And don't forget to share. Goodbye.